We'll talk about the election results and energy in Texas and many other related topics on November the 6th at the Austin Club. For this event today, please silence your phones. If you're going to tweet the event, we use the hashtag TribLive. And I believe some of the materials connected with this event have Twitter feeds for our panelists. If you're not going to tweet the event, please turn your phone completely off because we're about to live stream this event, so people out in the rest of the world would love it if we did it without your phone ringing, which you'd be surprised happens if we don't tell you to turn your phone off. We'll do about 40 minutes of conversation from the stage and then about 20 minutes of questions from the audience, have you out of here by 1 o'clock. Now let me introduce our panelists today, distinguished panelists who are going to be talking about this great topic of demographic change and the digital divide. I'm going to introduce them first. We're going to show you a couple of slides as fodder for our discussion, talk a little bit about the population numbers as projected out by the state demographer, and then we're going to get right into it. And again, think about good questions for the portion of the conversation that you all will participate in at about 20 till the hour. Closest to me is Juanita Budd, who's Executive Director of the Austin FreeNet, a nonprofit that provides free broadband access and training for Austin residents. Previously, she was Chief Operations Officer and Vice President for Program Pathways at the Girl Scouts of Central Texas. She has an undergraduate degree from Bucknell University. On her left is Representative Larry Gonzales, Republican of Round Rock, who won his House District 52 seat in 2010, was reelected in 2012, and is on the ballot this November seeking a third term. Previously, he worked for 9 legislative sessions as senior staff for members of the Texas House, for the Texas Lieutenant Governor, and for the Texas Attorney General. He has an undergraduate degree from UT Austin and a master's degree recently finished from Texas State University. Next to him is Don Shirley, who is Executive Director of Connected Texas, a public-private partnership commissioned by the Texas Department of Agriculture, whose goal is the development and the deployment of a statewide broadband strategy. Previously, he was Executive Director of the Connect Ohio program. He has an undergraduate degree from the Citadel. And then finally, a familiar face, gone for a little while from the most public view, but back today before all of you, Mark Strama, who heads the Austin office of Google Fiber, the ultra-high-speed broadband fiber optic access network coming soon to select neighborhoods here and elsewhere. For 9 years, he represented District 50 in the Texas House. Before entering politics, he founded NewVoter.com, the first company to enable internet-based voter registration. He also worked for Governor Ann Richards and State Senator Rodney Ellis. He is a graduate of Brown University. Please give our distinguished panelists a hand for joining us. Let's talk for a minute about the population numbers as a way to tee off this conversation. Back in 1980, the population of the state of Texas was 14.2 million. Wow. By 2040, it's projected to be 35.8 million, a 150% increase. By 2040, we expect the Latino population in Texas to be 18.8 million, or more than 50% of the total population, representing a 530% increase from 1980. The Anglo population in 2040 is projected to be 11.5 million. That is a decline as a percentage of the overall population from 66% in 1980 down to 32% in 2040. The African American population projected to be 3.4 million in 2040. That is a slight decrease from 1980, 12% of the total population in 1980, down to 10% projected in 2040. And I thought one other interesting statistic about the 2040 population as projected is that 18% of the total population of Texas in 2040 is expected to be 65 and older, and that is a doubling of the percentage of 65 and olders back from 1980. Now, here are some slides I pulled as context from the Pew Research Center related to the digital divide that I think, again, are chum for the sharks, fodder for our conversation today. Here is internet adoption from 1995 in America. This is across the country through 2012. 2012 is the last set of reliable statistics that most people cite from the standpoint of the digital divide. And you can see internet adoption has obviously precipitously increased from 1995 to 2012. This is interesting, broken down by gender. There's not much of a gender gap on the digital spectrum. If you include smartphones, alongside traditional broadband access, 81% of men, 78% of women. This is again as of 2012. Interestingly, without smartphones, the ethnic digital divide or racial digital divide is more accentuated. Without smartphones, 74% of non-Hispanic whites have access, 64% of non-Hispanic blacks, 53% of Hispanics. This is, again, across the United States. But when you add in smartphones, the gap closes a little bit, so it's 80, 79, and 75 respectively. You can see that in the non-white communities measured by Pew, broadband access is really trumped by smartphone access. Smartphones have really closed the digital divide.
That's right.
And I think predictably, the age question on the digital divide plays out as you would anticipate. Younger people are more likely to have an embrace of the digital spectrum than older people are. But I think, again, thinking that the population of Texas will have doubled in terms of the percentage of 65 and olders by 2040, that presents an interesting opportunity and a challenge for the state. If you look at education level, better educated people tend to be more on the digital spectrum than people who have less of an education. That's, again, probably not all that surprising. And this is, I think this is the Don Shirley piece. I think about the rural versus urban, or the rural versus suburban versus urban. Suburbanites tend to be first among geographic groups on the digital spectrum, urban next, and then people in rural areas of the state, where actually we have a fairly high, I think we have in raw numbers, the highest rural population in raw numbers of any state in the country at the moment. So that's actually a significant factor as well. Computer ownership. If you look at computer ownership, which is obviously the way that for many people they get access to the digital spectrum, you see that there is a divide again between whites, blacks, and Hispanics. Use of the internet has actually gotten a little bit better on the non-white end of the ethnic question here, because if you see back in 2000 there was much more of a gap. It's closed significantly since then. And then finally, I think this is those previous slides are from the Pew Research Center. These are from the Atlantic. And if you see that up at the top, you've got all whites, you've got non-Hispanic whites, you've got African Americans, you've got Asians, and you've got Latinos. That's the distribution along the very top that shows you racial and ethnic use of the internet. Here you have education, and then finally you have individuals according to household income, and it tracks exactly with what we showed previously. So these are basic statistics as a way to set the table for the conversation we're going to have today. Let me say to the panelists, what I see here as a layperson on this subject is a lot of progress, but also a lot of opportunity, a challenge for us to get over. We know the population of the state of Texas is growing quickly. We know that the composition of the population is changing dynamically. Representative Gonzales, from your perspective in the legislature, as you see numbers like this, what does it tell you about where the state is and needs to go?
Well, since you just stole all my talking points in the last 5 minutes.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah. I've done entire lectures on that Pew.
Yeah.
Yes. There is an opportunity, but a responsibility on our side, the legislative side,
right,
to ensure that we've got our partnerships with the cities and with private companies and the school districts to make certain that that access to information is there. And this last session, we put quite a bit of money into what I'll call bigger pipes, right? Trying to make sure that we've got bigger pipes, right? To make sure that we have this infrastructure going out. So we're making good progress there, but there's so much more to do.
Yep.
Because the information is in volumes. And I need to ensure that every child in those schools have access to that. My daughter's in Round Rock ISD. She's in 6th grade, downloading her homework assignment. She's doing a Prezi presentation,
yep,
and then she uploads it. That's pretty miraculous. 8th grade, she's Microsoft Office certified, right?
Yep.
She has access. She has these things. I need to do the best job that I can in partnership to make sure that every child has that same kind of access to the technology,
right,
and to the information that's out there.
But of course, realistically, Representative, you understand that much of that relates to what resources are available for school districts, not just in Round Rock, but in bigger cities and in smaller towns. And we're in the middle of a prolonged fight. We may never get out of it ever in our entire lifetimes over funding of public education. How much of this is about resources, and how much of this in these communities is about mindset?
Wow. On the resources front, that's why I think it has to be all of us in this together.
Yeah.
Right? The state in and of itself cannot fund a lot of things we want to fund.
Yeah.
But more and more, especially in Williamson County, we look at public-private partnerships.
Right.
Then who can work with us? What resources can we gather together to provide those types of services. And that's what we're very diligently working on. I think the mindset's there.
Yeah.
People understand what's there, especially now. They know what's out there. They want to go get it.
Right.
But it's going to take a whole bunch of us together,
Yeah.
cross-jurisdictional agencies, cross-jurisdictional governments, to make certain that
State can't solve the problem alone.
We can't
is
do
the
it
message.
alone.
Mr. Shirley, you know, if Mr. Gonzales, who is right as any parent would be to brag on his daughter and the experience of his daughter, if Mr. Gonzales' daughter were not in Round Rock Independent School District, but in Mejia Independent School District, if he were not in Williamson County, but were in Loving County, would he be able to tell the same story about his daughter's use of and access to these tools?
Well, you know, that's the unfortunate thing is, you know, the answer is no. And across Texas, we have such a disparity between, you know, rural Texas and urban and suburban Texas.
Right.
When it comes to access to the internet and the adoption level. And it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. You know, what we find is there are many rural communities that understand the value of access to the internet and are proactively trying to find ways to improve their access to get better bandwidth. But we also find a lot of communities where that's not the case. And I think one of the things that we were surprised by in our own research was that adoption of the internet, use of broadband, and the recognition that broadband was necessary in people's lives is actually not as high as what we might expect. Across the state, we have about, depending on what definition of broadband you use, we have about 98% of the households in the state covered with some sort of broadband service.
Yeah.
But we're only at about 70% adoption.
So in some cases, it's available, but people are just not using it.
Not using it. That's right.
Is it because they're not aware that they have access to it, or is it because they simply don't want it? Is this the case of all of us saying, here's broadband, and they go, you know what, I would rather have something else, or I'd rather not use it at all?
Yeah, the number one...
Can't force it.
Yeah, the number one reason that we get in our surveys is because I don't see why. So it's not even a matter of cost.
So that's a
because-
mindset rather than
Yeah,
resources
yeah,
question.
Yeah, and it's an education issue.
Right. Ms. Budd, let me ask you about the city of Austin, which is obviously a city that it brags about its embrace of technology across the board. That's as much as it's the live music capital of the world, it's also the technology capital, or a technology capital of this country and of the world as well. And yet, I-35 divides so many things on, you know, in West Austin or in Westlake Hills, Mr. Gonzales' daughter might well be bragging about access to and mindset about, but in parts of East Austin, not so much.
That is correct. Austin is an amazing city, and it does partner with private and public industry, and particularly Austin Freenet, which is a nonprofit. And
Right.
we are grateful for the support that the city provides. But there is a whole divide. There is a real divide where you have people who don't have it, don't understand it, that need it desperately. We have a center at the DeWitty Center where people literally walk into the job bank and say, I want a job, and they want to put down a resume. 80% of companies don't use paper applications anymore. So it's a huge deficit for people who don't know how to use it. So when the relevancy becomes important, then they say, help me with this. And that's a whole training opportunity.
So somebody has to be, maybe your organization or others, has to actually get in the business of teaching people just how to use it. Again, to Mr. Shirley's point, it's not so much about access to it, it's just knowledge of it, familiarity, and basic skills. Right. Mr. Strama.
Well, they are very much in the business of teaching people how to use it. They do a great job of that. It's a large unmet need, though.
How did we get here?
You invited me.
No, I didn't.
Anyway, no.
It's a little literal answer, actually.
Before you go really meta, can I speak to a couple?
I wish you would. Yeah.
A couple of points that they made I want to follow up on. You asked Larry if it's more a function, if in the rural areas, you know, do they want technology in the schools, or is it a problem of access, or is it a problem of sort of interest in it?
Yeah.
Obviously, rural areas are not monolithic. There's a lot of diversity.
Right,
some want it, some don't. But it's interesting when you look back at some of the drivers of legislation to increase the use of technology in the classroom, to say relax requirements that would allow schools to use technology-based instruction.
Yeah.
the drivers of that, in my experience, primarily came from rural areas. You probably know Mr. Abraham, who was a school board member in a very rural, I can't remember the school district anymore, but very rural school district. You know how, and he's been very involved in Texas politics. You've covered
This
him.
is Salem Abraham
Yeah.
up in Canyon, I believe, or up
Yeah.
in Canadian, Texas.
Canadian,
Texas,
that's right.
yes. Yes.
His entry point, as I understand it, his entry point into Texas politics was he was sitting on the school board in Canadian. He wanted his kids, who are all super high achievers, to be able to access online coursework, and state regulations and laws interfered with their ability to do that. That's how he got involved.
Right.
So, so I think there is demand in the rural areas for technology, particularly when it comes to education, where I think for folks where it's hard to hire an advanced physics teacher, technology is the only way to level
Right.
the playing field in those areas. To this issue of relevancy, it's amazing how consistently the polling shows that relevancy is the #1 reason, not cost, and even second, even the issue of knowing how to use it is second to the issue of people saying, I just don't know why it's relevant to me.
Yeah.
Now, that's hard for probably most of the people here to imagine, because most of the people here probably use the internet. It's so indispensable to them that you just can't imagine how anybody could think it was irrelevant to them. But if you imagine that you've never used it, and you think,
That's right.
I got this far without
Right.
it, and I get through each day just fine, then relevancy, you can see how if you've never used it and never realized the potential that it can bring into your life, the opportunities it can bring
Right.
into your life, then you can imagine that maybe it doesn't seem relevant until you get there. Back in the mid-'90s, I worked for MTV in the music industry on a campaign called Rock the Vote.
Rock the Vote, right.
And we were trying to get 18-year-olds to vote. They're the lowest performing voter group, 18 to
Right.
24-year-olds. They just don't do it. When we asked them why they didn't vote, they said relevancy. And again, to a group of civically engaged people, that seems absurd. But if you've never engaged before, that first step across
Right.
the threshold is a big step.
Well, on the one hand, you don't want to begrudge people their decision to not go there, right? On the other hand, doesn't that accentuate the differences in just information between different types of people? I mean, in the case of young people at the time that you were trying to get them to participate in the democratic process, those people had much less information available to them about the country that they were going to inherit from all of us old guys, right? In this instance, people in, Mr. Shirley, in rural areas may not have the same information about the stakes they have in the fights happening at the Capitol in Austin. Somebody in Loving County has the same one vote as somebody in Travis County.
Yeah.
The fights over all those big issues affect them just as much, but they may not know about them.
Right. That's exactly right. And attitudes are starting to change. They're just going very slowly. I've been doing this work, reaching out to communities and trying to help them improve their broadband situation for over 6 years now. And when I started, actually in Ohio, before I came to Texas, I actually got kicked out of counties. We don't want the internet. It's just nothing but bad news. That's the devil's work. We don't want it. Seriously.
If they thought that in Ohio, I can only imagine what they think about that here.
Have you heard that here? Have you
Well,
heard that
and
here?
I had it here when I first started 4 years ago. And I've had library directors. The internet is not what should be in the library. Libraries are for books, not for computers. Totally serious. Now, today, I do not get that argument.
Right.
Now, all I get is, we need it, we want it, we have to have it, where is it, when can we get it? So it's changing. It's
Yeah.
getting better.
So the fact that Texas is becoming a more urban state, if you look at the population trends, rural communities are shrinking in population, urban centers in Texas are growing, suburban parts of the state are growing. The fact is that the impact of rural communities not being as wired as suburban and urban communities may dissipate. That impact may dissipate as populations change. But the fact is there will always be a high number of people in the state who are part of the rural population, whatever the numbers are.
Right.
And we can't leave those people behind.
That's right. And then, the other misconception is that, well, it's just the seniors that don't understand. And in the reality, our research shows that from all age groups, and it's not just rural, there are urban neighborhoods where you can go in and talk to plenty of parents of kids that just, well, my kid's getting everything he needs at school. Yeah, but the education system is expecting him to have that same internet access at home now,
Right.
right? But the parent hasn't been trained on why it's important. You know, they haven't been educated, you know, why is it important to them? Why is it important to their kid to have internet access at home? And so they're not subscribing at home, even though the availability is there.
Right. Ms. Budd and Mr. Gonzales, talk about the disparity between the non-Hispanic, white, African-American, and Latino populations as it relates to this. Now, obviously, those lines are beginning to come together. That gap is shrinking. But nonetheless, as you imagine a population that is already majority and is going to be ever more so going forward, theoretically there's still some work to do to be sure that everybody in every community has the same access.
Absolutely. Again, talking about relevancy, what we're finding with the smartphones, people are beginning to understand the importance of the digital literacy and opportunities. And with that device, then they realize there's other things they can do. So that's a good thing. What we also need to remember is that for those children in the homes where the parents don't understand it, that lack of understanding then put those kids behind educationally. They have less access to goods and services. All of the governmental entities now are requiring for social service benefits that people go online, so they can miss a huge opportunity for themselves to bring themselves up in society by not having access. And so education is important, but relevancy, telling mom why is so much more important to buy broadband, internet speed than a pair of tennis shoes.
So you associate access to broadband or access just to reliable service.
Absolutely.
You associate that with picking oneself up economically, improving one's conditions economically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can tell mom and dad that, or I can show mom and dad that. So to Mark's point, when we gave the textbook money in 2011, we gave the textbook money to the schools,
right,
and said, buy with it what you think you need. Right? Deliver your curriculum in a manner you think is appropriate for your community.
Yeah.
We saw some go computers and laptops. We saw some do textbooks, a variety of different things, but each his own kind of thing. But when that child comes home now with a laptop, and mom and dad are unfamiliar with that, and the child is then showing them what it is and how they're getting their homework, I hope that is an education up, right? I hope that the parents can then learn from the kids the relevancy of what it is they're doing and why they need it and why they have to have access to it. Because that kid is demonstrating every day all the tools and information that's available. Yeah. Mom and dad don't know, right? We've said it ourselves. Mom and dad didn't use it. Mom and dad didn't experience it. Why do they need it? But here's their child then showing them, but this is why I need it. And this is why it matters. Yeah. And I think it becomes a lot more relevant to mom and dad when they see it and go, I get it, right? So that's the effort that we do because the public school system is that kind of, great equalizer where a lot of kids from all different walks kind of come together. And so I'm able to, by appropriating those dollars, hit a wide range of folks. Now, also the same thing with our public libraries that we mentioned. We put a lot of money in that Tech Share program this past session, millions of dollars that go into the public library system, the public school system. It's enabling them to have that at their fingertips, that they have it there to try to show them this is why it matters. Yeah. And we hope that message is filtered up.
Is it a different sales pitch within different communities? So to the question I asked Ms. Budd and you by extension, is the sales pitch in an primarily Anglo community different from the sales pitch in an African American community or a Latino community? Think about the Valley, where the population is growing so quickly and where so much of the engine of population growth can be seen today. It is there where we have historically as a state underinvested in so many things over time: roads, bridges, sewers, public education, healthcare, broadband. So if you go down to McAllen or you go down to Donna, are you having a different conversation with families in terms of acceptance of this access than you would, say, in Central Texas or somewhere else in the state?
Well, I'm a huge public school advocate, so I'm hoping that when the local decision there is made to invest in the technology, I hope that's what they're doing. Their message needs to be received in all of our communities.
And the point is it's a local conversation.
I think so I can set the framework for the legislature, and I can draft a bill, and we can pass it, and we can give the locals all the options in the world. But they then need to follow through with what we've set up for them, and then do it. And whether that's the ISDs alone, the cities, our nonprofits, whatever that little collaboration is, I can set the plate, but they've got to finish the job down there, and that's what we're hoping will happen in these areas.
Yeah.
And I
Ma'am.
just want to say that when you think about parents, I don't care what color, ethnicity, or economic background you come from, every parent cares for their child in some way, and we demonstrate that differently. I may not do it your way, but parents generally care for their children, and so the conversation can be the same when we're talking about passing the torch to the next generation. What do you want to do for your progeny? Really bringing it home so people understand, even if you don't care about it, your son, your daughter needs access to this beautiful tool so that we can make sure they have a better life than you.
Better opportunity going
Better
forward.
opportunity.
Mr. Shirley, Mr. Strama, we've been talking about the education aspect of this, which is obviously tied to almost everything else we're going to talk about today. But on the economic opportunity conversation that Mr. Gonzales and Ms. Budd brought up, in rural communities, Mr. Shirley, where industry or business is dying off, technology presents an opportunity for some of these communities to refocus or to pivot, does it not? And to actually allow for them to find another way to survive economically.
Yeah, there's no question. Just in Texas last year, over $200 billion of revenue were generated amongst Texas businesses over the internet. And so there's no question that the internet in and of itself can be a huge source of income for those businesses and for the state. One of the things that I'm excited about is I'm starting to see finally, in the last couple of years, a real engagement on the part of economic development directors at the county level, for instance, across the state, where up until really the last couple of years, broadband was not considered critical infrastructure. It wasn't considered an economic development tool.
Right.
All of their effort was put into, let's get that big manufacturer in here, let's get that highway through here.
Right.
And now they've realized that, the internet could be the answer.
And the fact is that for some people who might have been inclined a generation ago to leave the town where they grew up to move to the big city, they can actually now enjoy the benefits and the comforts of the big city remotely, right, virtually, by virtue of technology that was not available to them when we were all growing up, say.
That's right. And, one of the things that...
So it may save the populations of these communities.
Well, I was going to say one of the drivers behind some of these economic development efforts now is the fact that the youngsters in those communities are leaving. And the reason they're citing is because I can't get internet access here. Simple as that. I'm going to go to the city.
Right.
And, those rural communities don't want to see that happen, and so now they're putting extra effort into trying to improve that situation.
Mr. Strama, when you were in the legislature, you worked on a lot of issues that might fall under the heading of social justice. That was your disposition. Figuring out how to close the divide between the haves and the have-nots on a whole bunch of different fronts. The fact is, this economic development argument has some resonance, presumably to someone like you, who wants to figure out how to take the inequality gap and shrink it.
It does. I mean, to be honest with you, I feel as mission-driven in my current role as I did in my previous role. And the difference is in this one I can get things done. So,
right, yes. Unlike politics, there's actually the potential for something good to come of it, right.
But no, I'm very passionate about this work. It's tempting to think of internet access as being sort of a luxury on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yep.
But increasingly it's not. It's something that really dramatically affects how big the opportunities in front of you are.
Yeah.
And so I share Don's point of view on that. Can I go back real quickly to this issue of education and
definitely.
young? Y'all said something that I'd never thought of before, but when you talked about young people might actually be the way we connect their parents to the internet, and teach them how to use it, absolutely, because our kids can all
So
teach
bottom
us.
up as opposed to top down.
Yeah, I used to be on the board of a group called the National Student Parent Mock Elections that did these classroom-based mock voting things during election season, and then encouraged kids to go with their parents to vote on election day. We did this at broad scale across the country. There was real statistical evidence that having kids go home from school, having voted, having done a mock election in school that day, and say, Mom or Dad, will you take me with you when you go vote? Increased voter turnout among adults. And that I actually had never thought of it before, but maybe as, we're one of the things that Google Fiber is doing here in Austin is donating community connections to the city, 100 free gigabit
Yeah.
speed connections. And the city has chosen 100 beneficiaries of those connections, and they chose every Austin high school, every high school in the city of Austin, so including the non-AISD high schools and that are in the city of Austin. And I said to the member from Round Rock. And,
Yes, he's probably wondering why you're pointing at me. I'm Round Rock, right? Yeah.
because he's going to ask me.
Yes, he is. Possibly before the hour is up. Yeah.
But it's interesting to think not only about what those gigabit connections can do for the kids during the school day, but if the schools are really creative about being community places,
Right.
what it can do for the communities they serve outside of school.
Well, in the sense that, as Mr. Shirley said, for in a lot of communities where the kind of public square or the place where the community gathers is the library, and where these connections at libraries make it possible for people who may not have them in their homes to get access. Schools may play the same.
That's exactly right.
May play the same role. You brought up elections. You teed this next part up perfectly. I want to ask you about civic engagement and the degree to which, with demographic change coming and everyone chasing the elusive, unlikely voters in many of the populations that are growing around the state, whether access to technology possibly changes the calculation there. You know Mr. Strama very well. I know that in 2010, Texas was dead last in voter turnout in the entire country. In fact, we were 51st out of 50. We were behind the other 49 states and Washington, D.C. By 2012, we had inched all the way up to 48th. It's certainly no record to write home about. We have a problem in the state with voter turnout, and we have a particular problem in the non-Anglo populations of this state, which are growing as part of this demographic change. Mr. Strama, what does the possibility of technology deployed in service to citizen engagement do to this conversation?
Yeah. Obviously, I think technology can be a really powerful
This
thing.
has been your life's work in some ways, right?
You could say that.
Yes.
I mean, in 2000, when I launched this online voter registration application, we registered 700,000 people to vote by just putting it on the internet. If you compare what it took to register 700,000 people to vote the old-fashioned way, how much shoe leather you'd have to wear out, how many doors you'd have to knock on, how many volunteers and logistics you'd have to organize.
Right.
I hired some kids from this campus. I paid them with pizza and chocolate bars. They wrote some code
Cheap
and stuck
dates,
it on
huh?
a server.
They're cheap dates.
And the internet did all the work after that. 700,000 people registered to vote that way. So obviously I think that's powerful. Now, my interesting experience after that was my company was then acquired by a company out of New York called Election.com that wanted to be the first to market with internet voting. And in 2000, this might seem hard to believe in retrospect, but this was at the height of the irrational exuberance and the bubble and all of that stuff. And the conventional wisdom at that time, among a lot of people, was that 2000 was going to be the last election where we had polling places. That by 2004, everybody would vote from there.
Online, right? Hilarious.
And, yeah, right. So tell it to our investors.
Yeah.
But,
You got paid. That's all that matters. Excellent. It's fine. You sold at the right time.
But I do believe, I do believe that the experience, the internet has democratized the political process. There's lots you can point to that isn't perfect about it, right? There's silos. There's communities that talk to themselves and develop all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories and all that stuff.
Right.
But the overarching theme, the trajectory of what the internet has brought to politics is they've made it more accessible to people. They've empowered individuals to have a bigger influence on the process. In general, I think we're a lot better off for the role the internet plays in politics, and it'll keep getting better the more we can extend access and connect more people.
In a place like East Austin, Ms. Budd, does the prospect of technology becoming the route into politics appeal to people, or are people thinking we're not participating in a political universe for a reason?
You know, that's an interesting question, and I can't say that I have the answer to it, but I do know that with education and training on the internet or computer skills will provide people with more opportunity to think in that direction.
Right. And so possibly by getting access to more information, they become the mythical, thoughtful, and productive citizens, and when the time comes for them to make their choice, they think, I now have enough information and enough of a motivation to participate.
And I know how to do it. I mean, people are embarrassed about not knowing how to use the internet and access to computers. And the older they get, they're stuck. And so people create these barriers to say, well, I don't have it, I don't know where it is. And we have to demystify and tell them it's okay that you don't know. I didn't know at one point.
Right.
We're not born knowing how to use the internet. And so if I'm a 1950s baby or a boomer, I'm not going to confess that I don't know how to tweet. I'm, an executive director of a nonprofit that teaches people how to use computers. Just saying. So, take that.
Right.
all the way
Technologist,
through.
heal thyself. That's
all the way through to having people who never use the computer, then you're telling them to exercise their right in this forum that we don't even know how to turn on. So we really have to be careful about some of those opportunities to make sure if it's an opportunity, we have to invest before that opportunity becomes a demand.
Right. Mr. Shirley, Mr. Gonzales and Mr. Strama both know that as much as we assume all the fights at the Capitol are Democrat versus Republican, they're really urban versus rural. Many of the issues that come up in the legislature, coalitions form around that rural-urban divide. So in the old days, before technology made what was going on in the Capitol available to people so easily, people back home maybe didn't know what was happening. Maybe people in the Capitol were happy about that, actually. They'd rather they not know. But the fact is now people in rural areas of the state have access in real time to what's going on in Austin, and that may ultimately spur political engagement and political activism.
There's no question. And, one of the things that we do see, libraries have been referenced a few times. Libraries are being called on to be that information hub in those rural areas more and more today. And unfortunately, the libraries in Texas and across the country have actually been losing funding over these last few years. And particularly when it comes to embracing broadband expansion in libraries, computer access in libraries, that's actually not been growing like it had at one time. And so...
is that because rural populations are shrinking and so the assumption is there's less need?
No, there's actually more need.
More need.
The need is growing. But I think that for some reason, there's this assumption that libraries they're kind of, a semi-governmental agency in some locales and completely private in others, and that somebody else is taking care of that. Somebody else is making sure that they've got the money. And so they are the ones I hear the most from when it comes to this challenge of meeting the demand for computer education, for digital literacy programs, and just for simple access to information. Yeah. That's an area where I think there could be a lot of improvement made. We touched on mobile devices, and that is one, opportunity. There's no question, just as, has been reported across the country, it's true in Texas, access via mobile devices has dramatically grown, and for many, it's the only internet access that they have. What has still not caught up is the ability for them to conduct the same kinds of activities over those mobile devices that they can conduct over.
So the town, in the old days when my kids were much younger, we used to drive out to Big Bend a lot. So we'd go out along 10. You'd pass through Junction and Sonora and Ozona, head out to Fort Stockton. And in those days, the number of cell phone towers, access to, on your smartphone, or then smartphones, less smart than they are now, was nonetheless not that great. My assumption is that today that's been improved in many rural areas of the state, but presumably what you're saying is true, that they're still not going to have access to the same quality and speed of service.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. There's no question that mobile access has been improved, but the bandwidth isn't the same. And the devices themselves just don't have the capacity to deliver the same experience that you can get on a big screen.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that government is struggling with. For instance, the Social Security Administration has made it clear that they're going to need at least 50% of their clientele to interact with them exclusively online by 2018, or they're not going to be able to serve them. They just don't have the capacity to serve. And yet they are struggling with trying to make their services and their capabilities available in a mobile environment, like they can over a laptop.
I'm down with the idea that maybe access to speed and bandwidth and what have you is not what it needs to be in some rural areas, but you mentioned devices. Devices haven't caught up, so that bendy new iPhone is not going to solve our problems in terms of mobile access in rural areas? It's device problems as well as... Yeah.
I mean, you would be surprised that, and we take for granted, 4G, LTE, broadband speeds and the large screen, the phablets and their abilities. Those capabilities don't exist in rural Texas. There are many parts of rural Texas that are still on 3G networks. And so even if there is a mobile network there, it's not the same mobile network.
It's not the same as being somewhere else.
just like the broadband access
Right.
is not the same there.
Yeah, please.
Can I
and
make
then-
one additional point about
Please.
mobile? There's no doubt mobile is a very important part of closing the digital divide. But there's a problem in that it's also a more expensive way to access the internet. And the
Right.
data costs are really high if you use it, if it becomes your principal means of interfacing with the internet.
Right.
And you find the internet a valuable place and you want to spend a lot of time on it, pretty soon you're going to get some pretty high charges on that mobile bill.
Right.
And that's,
The economics of it don't necessarily work out.
not for the high volume user. So you may be a little bit less likely to be a high volume user if you're limited to a screen this big. You'll eventually kind of get tired of doing this. But I know people who can virtually, who can do almost everything on a mobile
Right.
screen. But if you use your mobile screen for everything, you're going to end up running over your data plan, and that gets expensive fast.
Right.
And one of the things, for example, one of the things that we're doing is we have not only this well-known gigabit speed connection, but we also offer people the opportunity to get basic broadband. If they pay a $300 construction fee to get it connected to their home, it's $0 per month for 7 years. So it's the best deal in town. We've talked to affordable housing providers who say, we've got a lot of tenants who don't have a device, but it'll save them so much on their data plan for their cell phone to have that basic broadband plan for $0.
So that they can go off of mobile and onto a. Yeah.
No, they can stay mobile.
Oh,
But
you mean
they
they
they can use mobile unlimited.
But there'll be
while
no.
they're on
But there'll be
Wi-Fi.
no. There'll be unlimited.
Because they'll
unlimited
they'll be on a Wi-Fi
Uh,
connection.
We're going to go to questions here in a few minutes, and I want you to think about what you want to ask. We'll have a microphone that goes around. Mr. Gonzales, you're no Aaron Pena, but you are pretty prolific in terms of your use of the internet and tweeting and what have you as an elected official. It may be good that you're no Aaron Pena, actually.
I was going to say, man,
right,
where are
yeah.
you going with that?
Back on this question of citizen engagement and the degree to which technology has transformed political activism, political engagement, and two-way communication, voters to elected officials to voters. This is one way in which access can really connect you to the people back home, especially, for you, you're at the Capitol as long as you are, and you're back and forth to Williamson County, but if you're Pancho Navarez representing Eagle Pass, or if you're, For Price representing, Amarillo and Points North, the fact is that you can stay connected to your constituents today probably better than you ever were able to, which is good, and they can stay connected to you better than ever, which may or may not be good, actually, from your perspective.
From an open government, transparency, accessibility, accountability standpoint, it's phenomenally better.
Yeah.
I first walked in that building in 1991, which if you wanted to know what was going on the House floor, there was a speaker in the hallway. And you'd leave your desk and you'd listen to the speaker in the hallway.
Not speaker as in capital
like,
S speaker.
like a little speaker.
S, small
a
s,
little
okay,
speaker
got it.
hanging in the hallway.
A
If you
Bose
want-
speaker, not a Craddock speaker, for instance. Right, yeah.
If you wanted to go and actually watch the session, you had to physically leave your office and go to the balcony, right?
Right.
Well, then guess what you're not doing? You're not doing your job in the office. And so what we've done now with the amendments being scanned in, the immediacy of information is fantastic. However, Mark said, this cuts both ways. As quickly as good and accurate information spreads, very bad and very inaccurate information spreads as well. And so when I'm at home in 2012 and I get an email that's saying all these terrible things about the Texas legislature and things that we did, the email stream was from 2005. Is how
Yeah.
old that email was. It was 7 years old.
Yeah.
But boy, once that starts making the rounds.
But in the grand
and
scheme
you
of things,
forward
Mr.
it-
Gonzales, you'd rather have people have more access than less because it makes people better informed about the issues that you're there working on their behalf.
And it also helps, it's easier for me to educate them when they have access to things that I want to share with them.
Yeah.
Right? Because I have all kinds of information that I can point to links and things
Yeah.
like this, and they can take those and they can also dive in
Yeah.
and get eyeball deep in the information that I have as well.
And so back on the demographic change question, so whether it's young people in your district or older people, whether they're Anglo, African American, Latino, whether they live in more rural parts of your district or more urban parts of your district, the fact is access is a leveler, it's a democratizer, an equalizer.
Okay.
If they use it.
If they use it,
If they
because
use it.
let me jump in real quickly, because I have worked in my 18 years as staff before I got elected, I have worked for some members where we wouldn't get 3 or 4 emails a week
Yeah.
compared to the hundreds that I get a day. And so they still have to use it. They still have to engage. They still want to have to engage. Just because it's there and they can follow it doesn't mean they do. And I've seen the disparity greatly amongst different legislative offices.
One of the
Mr.
most
Strong.
interesting things to do on the House floor, there's a lot of interesting things to do on the House
I was
floor.
going to say.
Yes, I bet.
There's no, there's no place in the world where you can, in a room the size of a basketball gymnasium, combine a more diverse group of people and force them to talk about all the things your grandmother taught you not to talk about in polite. Right. And the fact that there aren't more barroom brawls on that floor is kind of amazing. But one of the most interesting things to do is just walk up and down the aisles and see what people are looking at on their computers. And there's guys checking.
Would we feel
stocks.
good about our democracy if we did that?
It's interesting because, to Larry's point, on one hand, the members have the ability to communicate better, much more effectively with their constituents. On the other hand, they have the ability to communicate much more effectively with the members. It's interesting how that plays out because you do get a lot of real-time shifting of opinion on the House floor as a result of incoming tweets, incoming emails. You see members monitoring in real time what the chatter is in the blogosphere and on Twitter as they're getting ready to cast a vote. It's really changed the dynamics of the deliberative
the feedback
process.
loop has really contracted.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's immediate.
Significantly.
And while in general I'm bullish about the effect that removing the barriers of communication between elected representatives and the people they represent. In general, that's always good. To the extent that it's a fairly narrow segment of the electorate that is engaged in that real-time feedback to politicians, we have to guard against it being a distorting factor.
Very quickly, very fast answer. So we have to solve the problem of increasing access across demographic groups, racial and ethnic, gender, age, geographic, going forward in the new Texas that's not just coming, but is basically already here, okay? We have a nonprofit represented here. We have a public-private partnership, a P3 represented that's sort of quasi-state, but sort of not. We have an elected official who theoretically has his hands on the wheel of state policy or could impact it. And we have somebody who knows the political environment for many years, but is now basically representing industry, and industry's play in this. Each of you, very quickly, what's the one thing, if you could wave a wand, that would do most to increase access in the new Texas? Training of people on the ground on this technology. Mr. Gonzales?
Quote Juanita earlier, education. They have to know it's there and want to use it.
Mr. Shirley?
I agree.
Education? Mr. Strama?
I think I would say competition. I think what every consumer needs is competition for their business, and that will extend access and improve service.
So more players means more opportunity for people to get access to technology.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, questions. We have a microphone that we're going to walk around. We have two microphones that we're going to walk around. And if you'll wave your hand, we'll try to show our love equally across different sides of the room. Here first and then over here. Sir.
Hello. Dustin Cox. I want to thank all the panelists for their discussion and insight. My question today is with regard to legislation that was passed by the House and Senate last session with regard to Ken King's virtual school network.
Virtual school network.
Yes.
Bill, yes. So that was passed. There's been a lot of conversation about the rural setting right now. My question for you guys is, in terms of scalability and flexibility, how is the implementation moving forward of this policy going to affect the rural settings? Maybe the second part would that be, what type of barriers to entry is this infrastructure going to see, especially in those type of settings?
Mr. Gonzales, could you say a word about what he's referring to, or Mr. Shirley, either one?
I'll go ahead and start on that. One of the things that we did that's also in that bill is we recommended that there be an assessment of rural access amongst schools, actually access amongst all schools, because one of the things that we learned is that schools themselves don't even know what kind of bandwidth they have available to them. And so there was no way for us to know, for instance, which schools were in need of more bandwidth and which ones weren't. So that's one issue, is actually assessing where everybody stands with regard to internet access. And you have to do it within the school, and now you have to do it off campus as well. Do the students have access at home? We do have a fair amount of information with regard to that. But the second thing is then also helping students and schools understand that actually there's been a great deal of work to establish this virtual learning network and this virtual learning capability. And there are quite a few schools out there that aren't even aware that that asset is available.
And so the theory here is that schools in remote areas will have access to resources
That's right.
electronically, virtually.
From outside their community, that's right.
Much as we see distance learning becoming a big part of the higher ed conversation in the public ed universe, this is a version of it.
And we've seen it in other states very successfully, whereas a kid in a very rural area may not have access to the same type of curriculum or instructor, but the virtual school network allows them to go out and get that AP, calculus, whatever class they want to take that's being offered at home, but they can find it through the virtual school network. And there are other states that have championed this, done a fantastic job at delivering that kind of curriculum online that we need, in my opinion, as an appropriator, need to catch up with other states are doing as far as providing that infrastructure.
Is it enrichment over and above what's being taught in schools, or is it instead of? Is it a case where you think your curriculum at your school is not adequate to the task of educating your kids, so you go and you replace what you're doing in school with this?
There are some kids who are looking for a lot more
Right.
than what's being offered in their
So
school district.
Enrichment.
Correct.
Right, okay, good. Mr. Heidegger. Oh, no, Mr. Cook. Yeah. I saw Ted with
When
his
I
hand up.
file my taxes, federal taxes online, I get my refund faster. When I pay my utility bill online, I'm charged a convenience fee. What can we do to make local government less online hostile?
Right. I'm not sure this is under the heading of demographic change, but you all are in the hot seat, so answer. Right. Now, in fairness, I think I paid my City of Austin utility bill online and did not get charged a convenience fee this week. So there. But let's take him at his word that we still haven't caught up. Government services have not caught up with the private sector in terms of providing access to these kinds of things.
I would make a couple of points. I do think Texas as a state and Austin as a city have leaned in to using the internet to make their own business processes more efficient. I think we actually have a lot to be proud of on that. But to connect that question to this theme of what about folks who don't have access to do things online
Right.
like that? You know, I saw a headline in the last 24 hours about how expensive it is to be poor. Mm-hmm. And what the author meant was, if you can't take advantage of the online payment, you can't
Yeah.
get that faster refund.
Conveniences, right?
If you imagine how much time and money it is spent by folks who just can't, who might not have a car and have to use public transportation to take care of a transaction that we take for granted our ability to do instantaneously online.
Absolutely. Think about not having a car. I just need a stamp. So I got to catch the bus to the post office, go to the post office, buy the stamp, go back home, mail the letter. How much money have I lost? How many resources have I lost?
How much time have you
How
lost?
much time have I lost?
Right.
Just to mail a letter. And then you worry about and say, oh, these people don't care, and they're lazy, and their bills are late. And they move post offices out of communities, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Right. I was going to say that's Mr. Gonzales, but that's not even Mr. Gonzales.
No, that's up, baby.
That's federal.
That's
You're good.
right. Keep going.
Pay that forward or up or something. Right. Question over here, sir.
Yeah, since competition was recommended as one of the solutions to the digital divide, I was like you to comment on what do you think about those communities that actually have created give internet service as a public utility. I know in many places it's illegal to do that, but there are communities such as Chattanooga, Tennessee, that actually provide internet service through public utility. And since
So part of your light, water, and all that kind of stuff, you can get internet access?
the city is the competition. And also, don't you think protecting net neutrality would also, bridge the digital divide?
Well, that's an interesting idea. What about, if you want to flatten the hierarchy here, why not just make it part of the basic staples that we get from our communities?
Because it's against the law in Texas.
Could you change the law?
It needs to be changed, I think. But around 2006, there was a determination that the telecommunications industry was the best place for that problem to be solved. And laws were passed that preclude municipalities from engaging in telecommunication services. And that law still stands. So today, what we do see in some communities is they'll set up a nonprofit, for instance, that may have municipal representation on their board and so forth in order to try to create a community network to solve their need. But as a government entity, they're not allowed to be in that business.
Mr. Gonzales, where do you come down on that?
You want to go?
Well, he's in the telecommunications industry. I'd rather he not answer.
You'd be surprised.
Because I'm not going to believe what he says. Unless you show me the results of your internal poll that shows you losing, I'm not going to actually take your answer seriously. Mr. Gonzales.
That is, in the day and age of where we are in Texas politics, that is going to come down to the phrase you're going to hear a lot more in the next few months is going to be the phrase core function of government.
Core function of government.
Function of government. And we're going to have the debate and the discussion on the core function of government, because I'm guessing that in 2006, the legislature decided that that was going to be handled by industry and that competition would exist there. If you fast forward 8 years, going to be 9 years, society changes, where we are changes, how we think changes, demographics change. It's okay to revisit these ideas that we've looked at in the past, and we do it all the time, and take an accountability where we are now. So maybe in 05, 06, legislature said A. 14 years later, or 8 years later, maybe it's time to relook at those things. But I probably tell you that that's probably where that comes from, is this idea of the core function of government. But if the core function of government then provides all these things we're talking about in the education, it's a healthcare issue all of a sudden, and then maybe that conversation is more in play today than it was a few years ago.
Well, to the degree that the legislature is saying that we need to shift a lot of functions that the government typically pays for away from real and to virtual. So, like, for instance, the government's encouraging reducing the cost of higher ed by emphasizing
Correct.
distance learning. You can only distance learn if you have access to technology.
And that's what I was just trying to say. You
Right.
said it much better because you're you. But at some point, yes, that is cyclical, right? That is cyclical.
In some ways, it serves the larger purpose of government at the moment.
So wait, sorry.
Yeah.
I know
Okay,
you,
okay,
I
no,
know
okay,
you
well,
really don't
okay,
want me
go
to
ahead.
weigh
I'm
in
sorry.
on
No, it's all
this.
right. Get into it.
But I'm sorry for pulling out my phone in the middle of our deal, but I wanted to get the name right. This is a news clip from today, if today is still September 29th.
Yesterday.
That's
The, so
Margin of error, that's okay.
close enough.
Yeah.
Telecom Co-op GVTC Communications has turned up its gigabit fiber to the home network outside the San Antonio area just now. My phone just rang. That's great.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good point. I think that there are areas. Look, I mean, I don't think a municipality is going to probably want to get into that in an area where there is robust competition like there is right now in Austin. But the folks that are served by GVTC are going to now get gigabit speed internet service where there wasn't a provider previously of that service. So I think that's great. The Chattanooga example that you gave is a great one. I mean, and in Texas, I would think, you know, that the electric cooperatives, the rural electric cooperatives are potential agencies of that type of initiative. To your point about net neutrality, I don't, you know, I think we obviously believe very strongly in the importance of an open internet. I don't know how it affects the digital divide other than the extent to which, you know, one of the drivers of closing the gap is having everybody want and demand access to the internet. And an internet that's not free and open might not be as desirable to folks. So if you're going to drive demand, you want to keep it a desirable place to be, right?
Would making, to the questioner's point, would making internet access available as part of a package of staple services in the community help the problem that you see?
I think it could in the areas that I serve. But I also understand that, you know, monopoly creates the opportunity where you don't have options. And so you want to be very careful about pigeonholing people and saying you get this speed. So right now it's a gig, and next month it'll be 25 gigs, and we're still on a gig because it's a part of my package. And so we really want to think about how we package information or make it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great first step solution.
Question, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Enders. I'm the board president of Austin Freenet, also the managing director of a small software company here in Austin. quick question. And first of all, I want to thank you, Mark, for Google's contributions to Austin Freenet. The event that took place last weekend at the Millennium with 80 children, 85 kids learning about technology was fantastic. That's the kind of thing that we like to see in the Austin communities, particularly sponsored by a company like Google.
Question, sir.
But in terms of next steps, what else are you going to do to bridge that digital divide? We heard training, we heard education. What else is Google going to do?
Without this wanting to turn into a Google ad, give us the short answer.
Yeah, I think for now, let me focus that answer on the 100 community connections that I mentioned.
Okay.
We'll be launching some other initiatives in the coming months. Parissa Fatehi Weeks is our lead community impact person. She's sitting here on the front row, and folks are welcome to come and visit with her with your ideas about that. We do want to have a positive impact in closing the divide, but we'll have a bunch more announcements coming.
Good. I'm going to take one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. Wherever you have one on that, we haven't taken one on that side. I'm sorry, but if you have it, sir.
Hi. At the beginning of the presentation, there were some tables from Pew that aggregated broadband and mobile phone or smartphone subscriptions. I wondered, Ms. Budd, how good of a replacement really are mobile subscriptions for lower income or lower education clients at your office? Are people really getting the experience they need to get up to speed with the reduced affordances of phones and things like that?
Or is the problem that Mr. Strama talked about where it's not equivalent access?
That's an excellent question, and it's not. It can bring him to a certain point, but try filling out an application on a smartphone. Try ordering the supply on a smartphone, and then that little cat chew thing that says ZQPR. You know, people don't understand what that is, and so they fill the information out, and it goes blank. So no, it's totally not an option at all. Thank you for that.
And so in some respects, that statistic is true but irrelevant.
Yeah, because it's largely, if that's your only form, it's just not as interactive as a PC web. You know, it's just not there. It's just not there.
And yet you'll hear people that are in this business that will reference that statistic and say, oh yeah, they have mobile access, they're covered, everything's good.
Problem solved.
Yeah.
Problem not
Of course,
solved.
we know that's not true.
That's right.
The only thing I'd say is not totally irrelevant if accessing through mobile leads you to value the relevancy of the internet, and then take the next step.
And the fact is, technology may solve that problem to some degree by making access to things on a mobile device easier. And in fact, we're already beginning to see these in-app pay programs, where you can suddenly do more things inside apps that are on mobile devices than you could a year or two ago.
Right.
Who knows what the world's going to be a year or two from now? Right. Let's end this. Let's end it here. Our time is up. Please thank our panelists, Juanita Budd, Representative Larry Gonzales, Don Shirley, Representative Mark Strama. Thank you all for coming. Good. Much easier than you thought I would. I told you.